Welcome back to another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. It is said that one of the devil's greatest tools is the breakdown of the family unit. We have Wayne Ottenbreit with us to share his insight. Over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Rigel, and thank you to everyone for tuning in for another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. We are talking about divorce and its prevalence in our culture, and as Rigel hinted at, the havoc it wreaks on the family. I'm going to draw upon the Catechism of the Catholic Church here to frame the conversation. I've got a lengthy passage, but I think it's important that we really understand this issue properly within the context of the Church's teachings. So this comes from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Lord Jesus insisted on the original intention of the Creator, who willed that marriage be indissoluble. He abrogates the accommodations that had slipped into the old law between the baptized. A ratified and consummated marriage cannot be dissolved by any human power or for any reason other than death. The separation of spouses while maintaining the marriage bond can be legitimate in certain cases provided for by canon law. If civil divorce remains the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, the care of the children, or the protection of inheritance, it can be tolerated and does not constitute a moral offense. Divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. It claims to break the contract to which the spouses freely consented to live with each other till death. Divorce does injury to the covenant of salvation, of which sacramental marriage is the sign. Contracting a new union, even if it is recognized by civil law, adds to the gravity of the rupture. The remarried spouse is then in a situation of public and permanent adultery. Divorce is immoral also because it introduces disorder into the family and into society. This disorder brings grave harm to the deserted spouse, to children traumatized by the separation of their parents and often torn between them, and because of its contagious effect, which makes it truly a plague on society. So that is directly from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And to chat with us about divorce, we are joined, as Rigel mentioned, by Wayne Ottenbreit. I'll give his bio here briefly before we bring him into the conversation. So Wayne obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Bachelor of Education degree at the University of Regina in Canada and a Master of Education degree at the University of Southern Queensland in Australia. He completed postgraduate training in marriage and family therapy with the Family Therapy Training Program in Calgary, the Colorado School for Family Therapy, and the Philadelphia Child and Family Therapy Training Center. He also earned a certificate in addiction studies through Mount Royal University. He's been a teacher and a guidance counselor of children from kindergarten through high school and has been a small group counselor with children exposed to domestic violence. He has led a program for children dealing with significant loss, including separation, divorce, and death of parents, and also receives referral work for women and men suffering after experience with a procured abortion. Wayne's professional memberships have included the Catholic Psychotherapy Association of Canada, the Catholic Psychotherapy Association, the Society of Catholic Social Scientists, the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars, the Alliance of Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity, the Canadian College of Professional Therapists and Counselors, and the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. He is a Catholic Christian, a husband, and a father of 9 children. So Wayne, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, maybe to start us off, Wayne, can you give us a little bit, I just gave your bio, but maybe give us a little bit of background on how it is that you got into the work that you do, whether it's being a counselor, an educator, and maybe specifically in the realm of dealing with the victims of divorce.
That's a big question. I think I best start by saying that I'm from a different time than the two of you are. Things were different when I was young, when I was your age. I met my wife in the early 90s, and I, at that point, was a perennial student. But I wanted to marry her, and so I got into teaching as a career that was accessible to me that I thought I could do. And began into that, was fairly reasonably happy with that, got a good position. There's many things that are good about the teaching profession that teachers don't always share. There's certainly some downsides that I think deserve a bit of attention, but basically it's a pretty good career. But at a certain point, and I think some of it had to do with my temperament, my personality, some of it had to do with cultural change, I no longer wanted to be in the classroom. I was having a very difficult time being in what the classroom had become. And yet I was responsible for a growing family. And we had been able to have my wife at home with our children. By the way, we don't have 9 children simply, we have 9 daughters. And so I was looking, what could I do? Because I was feeling kind of desperate, and I thought I can't keep doing this. And so I made a decision through again a tangled path to pursue counseling. Got my counseling degree. Originally, my plan was to get out of the school system, but I found that my change to being a guidance counselor was sufficiently satisfying. And so I continued with that at the same time as I pursued getting my credentials as a marriage and family therapist. And so I've been doing that. I keep the passage of time, I think, is different for people your age than it is for people mine. I keep thinking things are only a couple of years ago, but in point of fact, I think they're probably a dozen or 14 or more years ago. Um, that Actually, I think it's 16 now, that I moved into being a marriage and family therapist as a side practice at the same time as I continued my work at the school district. This last year, I moved out of the school district and I'm now working with a publicly funded charter school that has totally rejuvenated my my professional career. But I continue my marital therapy practice on the side.
That's awesome. So I love the background that you have, because both Rigel and I. First of all, I'm jealous that you have 9 daughters. I want girls. So 9 is a lot, I'm sure. But if I got 9 daughters, I'd be stoked about that. My wife wants a mix of boys and girls. But Rigel and I are expecting our first children
All right,
right now.
congratulations.
So you're an
Thank
expert in many respects that we could come to.
And I'm prepared for that. I am not an expert. I am a person of experience.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of experience. And I tell you, having daughters is wonderful. It's great. One downside is we had amazing boys' names that we now forgot.
I actually have a funny story about that. Like, we didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl, but what we did know is that if we were having a boy, we have a name ready to go. We found out we're having a girl, and so we've been having to think about it a lot more. Yeah.
Nah,
Yeah,
too funny.
it's difficult. Naming, my wife and I consider naming to be one of the biggest decisions you have to make. And then also godparents.
Mm.
Those are two really big decisions that you have to make. And if I can throw this in, we have 5 granddaughters. And our other daughter is expecting. They aren't going to find out what sex the baby is. Well, they will, but they're not planning to do it in advance.
Amazing. So Wayne, on the topic of divorce, we had an episode that we recorded a while ago with a gentleman, Dr. Brad Wilcox, who is at the University of Virginia. He has a book that is called Get Married, and it tackles from a sociological perspective the statistics surrounding the breakdown of marriages, why it's so bad for our society, because our societies are built upon families. And so maybe if we can start there, you are a marriage and family counselor. You are a family man yourself. You've been married for decades. You have many daughters. And I'd imagine that you have encountered through your work, through your practice, tragic circumstances, people that are broken because of the breakdown of this fundamental unit. So maybe to start diving into divorce itself, can you walk us through why it is that divorce became something that you had any interest in professionally at all? Was this accidental that you would start encountering people, or was this something that you knew needed to be addressed by your practice?
I think that's a little difficult to answer because although I really am a big fan of Stephen Covey, being proactive, I want to be as directive of my life as I think is appropriate. There's a certain amount of trying to balance not passivity, but receptivity, I think. And so I don't always know what that line is, right? And so things have happened in my life. And I guess maybe I can start with part of that. Part of the reason why I went into marriage and family therapy as the particular flavor of counseling that I was going to choose was that I felt that I had had a great experience of family life. I mean, every family is dysfunctional, but my experience, I came from a large family. My grandparents were the saintliest people I knew, and they had large families. And the name of my practice is Vivens, and it comes from Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, who said, "Gloria Dei vivens homo." The glory of God is man fully alive. And I'm always just so inspired by the idea that God has created great things for us, and we usually are willing to settle for gruel, right? People are like, I would like to have this tiny little thing. and they don't seem to appreciate what God wants to give them. And I felt that in terms of family life. I felt that in terms of marriage. I don't have a perfect marriage, but I look at what people accept and think this is as good as it gets. And I'm like, that's not as good as it gets. That's not the way it's supposed to. Even if I'm not all the way there, that's not what we're in for. That's not what it's supposed to be. And so, if I can give one little anecdote, which is not particularly about divorce, but it is about the importance of relationships. And it goes back to the very beginning of my teaching career. And I was a homeroom teacher, or what we called a teacher advisor. And I had a grade 12 girl in my class. And she was very upset one day. And as her homeroom, that we had a kind of a special relationship because I was her go-to person for all of her years being in high school. And so we were talking a bit, and she was explaining that it was a relationship issue, her boyfriend. And her boyfriend was somewhat abusive. I don't remember the details of the abuse, but somewhat abusive. And as we were talking, I said, so why are you with him? Why don't you break up? And she said, because that's what guys are like. Right. And her experience was that men are this way. And so either I am with this guy that I know, and that's the way it is, or I go through some unhappiness, break up with him, and struggle to find another guy, and it's going to be like this anyway. Right. And I thought, like, that's the legacy that had been given into her life because of her experiences, right? Presumably with her father, presumably with other guys, right? The example that she had seen. And I thought that is so tragic, and frankly, not just tragic, but anger provoking, that it's diabolical, the message that exists in many people's minds, that this is what we settle for, right? Even on a human level, it doesn't make any sense. Right.
Well, that's incredibly sad. I don't think it's uncommon. I have heard that comment from other girls as well. And even, when we see parents parent their kids, if they have a boy, they'll say things like boys will be boys. Like, God forbid you should have higher expectations of them, set a higher standard for them. But you're right. Like, a lot of girls have this experience with men where it's, they haven't been raised well, or they don't hold themselves to a standard. They don't have the proper respect for women. And so if I can reframe and kind of understand why you chose your practice, it seems like you're trying to guide people towards a fullness of what a healthy relationship is and the joy that comes with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, when we talk about therapy, when I was younger, even younger than you guys are, I was zealous in a way that I don't think was always charitable, that I don't think was always what I was supposed to be. Right. I think my zeal now is a better zeal. And so I want to just couch what I'm going to say in those terms. Therapy is not a directing of another person. It's not me going in there and telling another person what to do, right? Which in my early zeal, I might have thought that's what I should be doing. What it is it's trying to help a person explore. And one of the things that's important to me is that I am a therapist who's informed by his Catholic faith. And so there's a phrase that those of us who think of that as important. It's working with a Catholic anthropology, right? It's an understanding of the human person that comes from our faith. And so that includes all kinds of things. It includes the idea of the nature of what a sexual relationship is. It includes the idea of what marriage is because of what sex means and all of those kinds of things, right? And so I work with people in a way that is respectful to their freedom, and never acquiesces and says, yeah, let's settle for something sinful, but also is not taking their responsibility away from them. So what I do want is I want to give them some type of a taste of what is on offer to all of us. And if I am able to do so, to help them along their journey to get closer to the fuller realization of that, right? Because it seems to me if I can make it a little bit bigger, one of the reasons why we have a struggle with faith is people don't know the goodness of God, right? And if they can get a taste of who he is and what he wants, then they can start being like, yeah, you know what? This is crappy, but that's not what God wants, right? Yeah, I'm angry, but I'm not angry at the God who created me, right? And so I reject the things that keep me from him, that keep me from his plan, not say, throw the baby out with the bathwater. No offense to God calling him a baby.
I think so. In terms of bringing this to the plague of divorce, if we can call it that.
Sure. Yeah.
We know that the church's teachings on divorce are very clear, and they are very antithetical to cultural norms in the Western world and increasingly in other parts of the world. And sadly, even many people who are Christians generally have completely abandoned long-held teachings like the tradition that I was raised in before I converted to the faith. Divorce is just an unfortunate thing that happens, but it isn't being married isn't seen as kind of what you've been touching on as a way that we can flourish. It's not talked about in those terms. It's seen as something that is desirable, yes, but then if it doesn't work out, well, that's undesirable but understandable, and so you leave. And then if you find someone that's more desirable than the prior one, then that's great. And the Catholic Church does not see marriage that way. Marriage is a sacrament, and for that reason, I'm going to draw upon something here that I've just got written on this topic. The church sees marriage as indissoluble, as it reflects God's own covenant with his people. The sacramental nature of marriage elevates it beyond a mere natural contract, making it a permanent and unbreakable bond that cannot be dissolved by any human power. In the Catholic Church, there has never been and can never be such a thing as divorce, no matter what civil authorities say or permit. So I think when we're talking about divorce, and Wayne, I'd love your thoughts on this. When we're talking about divorce, many people in our culture will hear that the church doesn't permit divorce, and they will think, well, that doesn't make any sense because the government does. And in those instances, it's like they're equating legality with morality. But at one point in time, slavery was legal. So that's a stupid argument. Obviously, morality precedes legality. In a good legal system, legality parallels and follows morality, but not the other way around. So the fact that governments allow civil divorce doesn't mean the church sees divorce as any different than it has always seen divorce, which is a permanent, the breaking of a permanent union that cannot be broken. Now, I would imagine, informed by your Catholic faith, your version of marriage and thus your version of divorce, which isn't a thing, when you're counseling people, they've bought into our society's version of divorce. So when you're counseling, what does that look like? Do you have to have these sorts of conversations with Catholics or non-Catholics on what divorce actually is and why it can't happen?
So one of the blessings I think in my life, especially my professional life, is that most of the clients that I see now, because I don't rely on that income as this is what our family lives on income. I'm not desperate to see all kinds of people, right? And I tend to view it as I see the people who want to see me, that I have something that I can do with them, that we can work together. And that usually means they're referred by previous clients or often by priests. And so most of the people come to see me because they want somebody who respects their faith, even if we don't talk about it explicitly in my office, who respects their faith and therefore works within those understandings. And so they understand, they know. I have a few clients that are not from that background, and there's different ways that I have to work with them and so on. But these people want to have someone who helps guide them through the messiness of life, to walk with them on that, and especially the messiness of relationships where it is selfishness. That is always what it is. It's selfishness. And it's not one person or the other who is the selfish person. We are both selfish. One might be much more selfish, but we're both selfish. And we need to do something to work that out. I got to say, one of the things that causes me joy is imagining what this will all be like in heaven. Right? When we look back and we're like, do you remember that time? Right? However heaven actually ends up being. But to anthropomorphize it, to look back and say, I can't believe I believed that. Right? I can't believe that I did that. Right? And to have a sense of joy or self-deprecation about it. Right? And to be able to say, yeah, I was off on that. But in some respects, this time now, which matters, right? This time now matters, but it doesn't matter in comparison to our life with God. And we make it through this messiness and we really try to do our best, right? But when we look back, it's like what happened yesterday? Meh, that was yesterday. It matters because it got me here to today. At the time, it really mattered, but now it's yesterday. I have a sense of hope about this, even as much as divorce is a plague. It's a terrible thing. And Dr. Wilcox knows many of the details better than I do. Like the stats, people say 50% of marriages end in divorce. Apparently, that's not entirely accurate. For one thing, it takes into account first and second and third marriages, and second and third marriages are more likely to end as much as an authentic marriage can end. And so those are not entirely accurate, but the state is bad. Like it's certainly bad. Even one divorce is bad. But we're looking at more than one divorce. We're looking at a state where people don't fully understand what we're looking at. Maybe one thing that I would throw in, and I don't want to say that I'm anything special about this, but this is an experience that I have, is that for me, my wife and I, we got into our marriage knowing this is it. Like there's no way that our relationship can be annulled. There's no intelligible, rational way that somebody could look at our relationship and say, yes, this is an annullable relationship.
Wow.
We understood what we were doing. And we've gone through ups and downs. Most of them have been reasonable. Most of them are my fault. And I'm not saying that as a joke about my wife. That's true. I'm the more selfish one, which, by the way, I think is usually the case. It's usually the man. But when things are off with her, my life is devastated. You know, I can't do the rest of my life without my wife.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Like my professional life is off. My relationship with my daughters is off. My friendships are off. Everything is off because that most primary human relationship is not where it's supposed to be.
That's really interesting, Wayne. And my wife and I were exactly like you and your wife when we were getting into marriage. We fully appreciated the depth of this union, and we were like, whatever happens, divorce is not an option. So it was kind of preparation for just like, no matter what happens, like we have to stick together, so we have to figure it out. But that's just the way life goes. It's not like every relationship we have there's no relationship we have where it's all just sunshine and roses and stuff, and it just doesn't work that way. My concern slightly is that the bar for conflict has come down significantly. What people are willing to tolerate has reduced, maybe because of selfishness, probably because of selfishness. But people just seem more willing to quit easily in relationships, and that's a worrisome trend. I'm wondering if you've seen that as a trend in your practice, even if there are generational differences between the younger age groups and the older age groups. Has there been anything that you can point out?
There's nothing that I can say objectively, but this is a question that I've often looked at. I've looked at it as a teacher in the classroom. I've looked at it all kinds of different things, looking at it from 30 years ago till now. By the way, we've been married. We just celebrated 31 years.
Wow, congrats.
But looking at things when I was first in the classroom, which was basically 30 years ago, to now, and saying, obviously it's different, but what's that difference, right? Is that difference, how much of that difference is me and my perceptions and the way that I have changed and the technology and all of that? And how much of that is about people themselves, broadly speaking, culturally speaking, socially speaking? And so it seems to me clear that there have been objective changes, but how could I prove that? I don't know. Longitudinally, I don't know how I could do that. It seems to me that we are a more selfish people, right? That we are more concerned with just myself, right? And I think there's correlations between generational things as well as levels of religiosity. There's correlations with all kinds of things. Correlation and causation are not the same. But when there's correlation, I think there's some type of meaningful connection. What do we do about it? I don't know. What we do about it are things, I think, like this podcast. Things like Travis and I met through an educational initiative. There are all kinds of things that happen, I think, in little ways that I think matter very deeply. But ultimately, Rigel, you and I were talking about this before we were on the air. Ultimately, it is about your families. Ultimately, it is about your children, right? When I look at, I'll get a little political here for a minute. The more political leaders we have who do not have their own children, who do not know what it is like to care about the next generation, the worse off we are.
Wow.
The more political leaders we have who don't seek after a stable, meaningful, long-term romantic relationship, conjugal relationship, marriage, the worse off we are, because we are invested because of that.
Hmm.
My daughter, who most recently had a baby, was over yesterday, and she was saying something about, since having her daughter, she wants to be a better person. She wanted to be a good person before. She wants to be a better person now.
Wow.
And I said, I got lots of problems, but one of the things that I've had going for me is God gave me a deep, deep heart for my daughters, and the idea that I want to protect them from the worst of who I could be motivates me to do better.
Something interesting I want to point out there quickly, Travis, before I pass it on to you. First thing I want to point out actually is when you mentioned it's usually us men that are more selfish, but I'm going through the consecration to St. Joseph right now in preparation for fatherhood. And it's just insane. Like the virtues this man had, he is the model of self-sacrificial love. It's just kind of ironic that we're usually the more selfish ones. You also mentioned that having children kind of motivates us in a way that we never even knew was possible. I am convinced already before my child is born that I've struggled with discipline for a long, long time. But I know that having this child come into my life is more likely to help me become the person I need to be, as opposed to if I were to try to do it on my own. No doubts about it.
Yeah. And I would throw in marriage as well.
Mhm.
Right. I think for some reason, having a child is a bigger amp. I think maybe because in marriage there's a little bit of selfishness still, because I'm marrying you because you make me happy. And children are a little bit different, but yeah.
A couple things from what the two of you have just mentioned there, and this will sort of take the conversation down a slightly different path. For people that have previously listened to the podcast, they will know that I was previously married, although we did a thing that was legally called a marriage, but knowing what we know now, it was not like we didn't even know what we were doing, me and this woman. And I think rooted in selfishness is what we both were. Fundamentally, we came into that relationship doing a thing that we were calling marriage, and we were categorically not open to life. And so, Wayne, what you just said there about the more politicians we had, I've never thought about that before, but that just seems clearly to be the case. If you have people that are making policy decisions at the highest levels in our culture, and they themselves either don't want or can't appreciate what it means to care for those who come after us, that is fundamentally rooted in some measure of selfishness. I think it has to be. And I've never thought about that before, but you're so right. And that's a little worrisome, because now that I am thinking about it, I'm thinking about all the politicians that pop to mind, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you're
It's
right.
terrifying.
It is terrifying. So, Wayne, in terms of, we can't change how our culture is at a high level, but we can do little things like you said, this podcast. And so we have a bit of an audience. Most members of our audience who are listening are Christians of some sort. The majority would be Catholic Christians. And so they will have some measure, hopefully a good measure, but some measure of understanding on the importance of marriage, why it should be indissoluble. Do you ever find yourself, you said you speak mostly with Catholic couples or individuals, do you ever find yourself having to educate them on the church's teachings on marriage? Or are they usually pretty grounded in the church's teachings, and they just need counseling so they can get through the difficult times that inevitably befall all of us, even in the best grounded marriages?
So most of the people that I'm talking to professionally, and frankly, most of the people that I talk to in my personal life as well, because of the choices that our family has made, are people that have got a grounding in the Christian faith, at least. But more specifically, usually they are Catholics who take their faith seriously. And they usually know what that means. Where the difficulties are, and this is the reason why I have a job as a therapist, is emotions, right? Is the flesh is willing, or spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And it is just difficult for us. And I'm sure you guys know this as well. I'm not asking for public confessions, but we struggle, right? I know the good. I was just reading Paul last night. He talks about the good that I want to do is not what I do.
St. Augustine
Right.
talks about this too.
And so we're pretty clear on it.
St. Augustine
Sorry?
talks about this too a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. We know it. But we also are so weak in a way that is so hard to understand, right? We like to think that reason carries the day, and I know it, and therefore I will do what I should do. But no, so often when you look at conversions, I also was thinking it would be an interesting study to do to look at converts. Most of the time, converts are because of who you got married to. That's why you converted, right? Now, maybe it was because you were also doing some reading, but it's because, oh, you're that religion. Oh, okay, then I'll be that religion too, right? And so people just need help navigating the messiness, looking at their options, looking at how can I do this? Because again, one of the things I often say in my office is people have option A and they'll have option B. And they're like, option A is stupid, option B is stupid. I can't do anything. I'm like, no, no, no. There are thousands of options. We're not being creative here, right? And or we're making excuses for ourselves, right? Because if you say I can't do A, I can't do B, then you get to make a choice that in our selfishness we want to make instead of calling ourselves to the higher, right? And so the people with whom I work are not looking for catechesis, and that's kind of not my job professionally as a therapist. I can ask some questions. I can ask them, what is most important to them, et cetera, et cetera. But as I say, that's not usually what these people are looking for. They're looking for help in mess.
So Wayne, you also probably see situations where you have clients come in and maybe one of them is a little bit more committed to trying to improve things in the marriage versus someone else who isn't. Maybe one of them is a little bit more close to God. The other is, hasn't been to church in years even. Like, how do situations like that get handled?
So professionally, that seems to me right now, that's kind of a professional question. The professional question might be one of the things that we use is what we call motivational interviewing. And that is to try to lead a person into clarifying my goals. What is it that I want, right? Is this merely a right now? And then I want to be speaking to the higher person within you who is like, no, I don't want to just do the right now, or I want to do the right now for 15 minutes. Right. And then I'm like, yeah, you know what? Vent for 15 minutes. Do whatever you kind of feel like you have to do right now. But then I want to talk to the person who's responsible for your life. And I want to say, we need to do something here. And we'll titrate it, we'll ramp it in. We don't have to go like cold turkey. We don't have to immediately, this is what you're doing. I need you to be wearing a mantilla and going to mass every day, all of that stuff. But I want to help you do the things that are going to get you to the authentic goal. Right. And that's one of the complications of therapy is because we always run out of steam, right? We always run out of steam. And so what I wanted yesterday, I only want 80% today. And then tomorrow I'm only going to want it 50%. Right. And so how can we get back to the authentic happiness? And some of that is, again, sharing the vision and saying, this is what is on offer here.
We seem to live in a culture. We don't seem to live. We definitely live in a culture. And I will share an anecdotal story just to prove how true this is. We seem to live in a culture where divorce on demand isn't even questioned. There are billboards all over the city that the three of us live in, literally advertising no hassle divorces. That's literally a slogan, no hassle divorce. It's like, could anything be more of a hassle than the tearing apart of a family unit? Like, the idea that it's no hassle is almost shockingly naive. And yet that is the slogan.
Or get it done the easy way.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this messaging just plagues our culture. It's all around us. And so when my first marriage, that wasn't a marriage, but we were calling it a marriage, when it was falling apart, I convinced this other person who I didn't know at the time, learned later, that she had already moved on. And that was the reason for the ultimate breakdown. But at the time, I didn't know that. And so I was prepared to do whatever I thought we could do to salvage this relationship. And so we went to counseling, Wayne. We went and saw a person who was a professional, not religious whatsoever. We weren't religious. We weren't practicing any religion. And so we just found someone that seemed to specialize in healing broken marriages. Or so we thought. And so we went to a couple sessions. And I remember, and this is almost like scarred into my brain. It was such a visceral moment in my life. We're sitting there. I feel like I'm fighting tooth and nail to figure out, can this be salvaged? And this counselor, maybe he realized that this couldn't be done. And so he was just throwing his hands up. But his advice to me was literally, he just looked me in the eyes and said, you know what? If she wants to leave, just let her leave. And he just said it in such a flippant way. And maybe he didn't mean it that way. I, want to be charitable. Like maybe he didn't mean it as if like, she doesn't want to be with you, you want a divorce, then so be it. Who cares? But it just struck me that, oh my good, you don't even seem to think this is a big deal. What am I paying you for? You're supposed to you're
Right.
supposed to be coaching us through this. And it's just like, you want to throw in the towel, just let her do it. Just move on. Now, I'm certain that if you had a client who was telling you these things, that wouldn't be your advice, obviously. But what would you say to someone who is surrounded by this culture where it's divorce on demand and it's just instantaneous almost, it seems? What do you say to
Yeah.
people who get to a point where they're ready to throw in the towel? What do you say to those people?
So one of the things that I really love about counseling, about doing therapy, is that it is not hypotheticals. It's not large group. It is me working with an individual, with two, maybe with a small family or whatever. And therefore, I marry together the very particularities of their situation and then my experience and my training, right? I can still try to do the hypothetical here, but that's what I like, is it's really about being very focused on what's taking place. So I might, acknowledge the fact that, yeah, people are free to make their decisions. But in fact, actually, I have a client right now who his wife has seemingly left him. It's a complicated situation. Um, and so he and I are focusing on we need to do your work, right? We need to be working on what you are capable of doing. And then, God willing, we will look to a place and a time where the relationship might be able to do some healing, right? But if I've got the two people together there, I'm going to be talking about, yeah, you could make that choice, but is that the authentic choice that you want to make? If that's the authentic choice that you want to make, there are certain parts of that that I will be unable to help you with. There are some parts that I can help you with because you're another human being and I can accept mess. I can't accept helping you into sin. I'm not
Yep.
able to do that. I can't accept helping you reach for something that I think is going to hurt you. And that any therapist can say it's part of our code of ethics, phrased in different ways. It's just that for religious counselors, we also throw in the idea that you can be spiritually hurt. And so I'm no longer an expert, right? I'm not an expert at helping you do something to harm yourself. So you might have to see somebody else. But if you want to look at what can sustain you, as long as your spouse is saying, I don't want to be with you anymore, yeah, I can help you with that part. But when it comes down to it, you cannot control anyone other than yourself. We need we need to be able to work together. That's an added part of the messiness of life, is you can do the best you can do, but if the other person's not going to cooperate, you're kind of stuck, right? And I can be a little bit hopeful and a little bit of joy inside of me because I look to the eternal as well. But on the human, on the temporal level, that's horrible to have somebody say that, after I gave myself to you, I gave my body to you, I gave my emotions, all my weaknesses, and then you said, "Not, I don't want it anymore." That's a devastating message to say to somebody. Now, I would couch that by saying, these days, I'm not sure how many people are doing that full giving anymore.
Right.
Right? I think they're holding back a lot. And so the pain that is there is a moderated pain compared to what it could be if they had actually entered fully into saying, this is it. I'm either happy with you or I'm unhappy with you. And so I'm going to choose to be happy with you. So let's do some work.
I really appreciate how you just explained that. It actually takes me right back to, this would have been February of 2017. So this woman has left me. The counseling didn't work. She has left me. And so I moved back in with my parents, and I'm just broken. I leave employment. So I literally, like, my life falls apart. And my dad was there, and, I can never thank him enough for this time. Like, I just needed someone that I thought could, like, just listen. And no one could tell me to make sense of it. There was no way I could make sense of it, but just someone to listen in my brokenness. And my dad said something that was, at first when he said it, I was like, oh, that I wish I didn't know that. And then as I reflected on it, and it's very close to what you just said. He basically said, and he always calls me Bud. So he said, Bud, even if you give 100%, 100% of the time, it's still only 50%. And that is exactly what you're talking about there is, it takes two. And so even if I was giving 100%, and I wasn't, like, I'm far from perfect. fail constantly. And I know that. But even if I was able to give 100% to this other person in this relationship, it still wouldn't guarantee that it works, because the other person is 50% of the equation. And now at the time, my struggle is that I didn't have any perspective on the eternal. I wasn't grounded in anything. It was just here and now, and here and now feels painful, and so it sucks. And I guess I can only speak from that experience that I went through, but the truth of 100% of myself is still only 50% of the relationship was profound, and it really struck me. And I think it helped me get back to a place where I could start reconstructing my life. Wayne, can I ask you, dealing with broken situations, the gentleman who you just mentioned, a client of yours, I can only imagine how hard that is. And I'm certain that you deal with all sorts of really painful situations. How you have to have hope. Like, you're a Catholic. Our faith is rooted in being hopeful and having hope. So that's part of the answer. But I'm curious, when you're dealing with people at their most broken, or going through situations that are so hard, especially when it comes to the breakdown of families or potential breakdown of families, does that ever weigh on you? And if it does, how do you maintain a positive, happy perspective, a hopeful perspective when you're dealing with people at their most broken?
I think one of the things that I discovered when I moved into this work, I wasn't surprised that I would care. I do care. I authentically care. And part of that is because I think I have an eternal vision, that I think I'm going to be hopefully with this person in eternity. And so that matters to me. But a thing that I discovered was a grace that I don't carry the emotions of what takes place in my office most of the time. Right. There's a few times where some things are difficult, and I have to do some processing with that. I have access to being able to talk with colleagues. I can talk with my wife in a way that preserves confidentiality, that helps me with the emotions that are happening there. But part of the hope, and I like to say, where it's appropriate, I'm the least emotional counselor that you will probably ever find. Having daughters has also been a blessing to me, because I used to disparage emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I will go on record as accepting the stereotype that I actually think is a reality, that females are more emotional than we are. And my daughters, because I care about them, have helped me to see that emotions matter, and that I need to accept and work with them at the same time as I don't live in the land of emotion, because I think that is dysfunctional. So I look at, so I don't want things, where I was going is, I don't want things to be too emotional. I want things to be rational where it's appropriate for them to be rational. And to say, I hope, and then make that seem like it's just pie in the sky, the clouds and unicorns and butterflies and stuff, I don't think benefits anybody. Right. So when I think of hope, to me, hope is the conviction that God has got this under control, and that the pains of today matter, but they will have a very different experience for us in the future. That my hope is not necessarily the hope that that relationship will be back together. If it is a sacramental marriage, yes, I want the marriage to be back together, but there might be some work that has to be done. In fact, actually, there has to be work that's done, because if they're at this place, it's not simply plop, we're back in the same spot, because then we're going to be back in dysfunction. You need to do better, and you need to accept better. You need to accept what God has on offer. So I've got a hope that there is something good, even if I don't know what that goodness looks like. And that if I'm going to be part of this person's path, then I will work to discover that as best we can together, right? And if I'm gonna throw this in here a little bit. It's a little bit about personal, but it's more about something that's not personal. So before I met my wife, I was in a relationship that I viewed at the time, it was when I was quite young, relatively young, that I took very seriously, and I was devastated when she broke it off. And it took me a long time to recover from it. But in that time, I think actually it was after that time I had met my wife. My wife was a country music lover, and I was one of those horrible people who didn't appreciate country music at the time.
I'm right there with you.
Heard it. There's a time, Rigel. So my wife introduced me, and one of the country music songs was, I think, by Colin Ray. I think that was a river, right? And in that, he talks about his previous relationship having been a river, right? And he was so invested in it. And his relationship with the woman who became his wife is the ocean, right? And at the time, the river mattered a great deal. It was so awesome and amazing. But I look back now and I'm like, that was a river, right? I don't dismiss the goodness that was within it and the care that was within it and so on, but I am now in the ocean, right? And so perspectives matter. And you have to be careful when you talk with people because you don't want to dismiss their experiences and their emotions and so on. But at the same time, don't live too much in what is taking place right now, because right now is just a moment. There's going to be another now, but it's just waiting for us.
So, continuing the river analogy, we do have to keep in mind that rivers do flow into the ocean. So, when we think about past relationships, you know, they do feed into, our marriage and stuff. And there are anxieties and worries and fears and, things that come from our past experiences that feed into our current experiences. What is the best way to overcome those things, those past hurts, those things that can possibly damage our current and more important relationship?
Right. That's a great question. I love what you did by way with the analogy. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, yeah. One of the things that I think is interesting is before the fact, we have our plans and things we want to avoid and all of that. But then once something has happened, even if it was something bad, right? Then that has become a part of us moving forward. And it seems to me, I don't know how to talk about that. On the one hand, yeah, I would like to avoid sins that I've done, but it happened. And that has now brought me to the place where I am today. So I'm not grateful for the sin, but it is a part of who I have become and where I am now, right? And so those experiences, I think do matter for us. I think some of it, again, I mentioned Covey before. To me, one of the first things is to be his first habit is to be proactive. And to me, that is to take responsibility for your life, to say that I am the primary agent in my life, and that maybe involves creativity. That I want to look at, and some of the I. By the way, I'm not a person who believes that everybody should go to therapy, and in fact, I think most people should not go to therapy. Right? That is it can, for some people in the wrong circumstance, it can induce a victim mentality.
Hmm.
Right? Most people are served by having good friends and family, and having a good attitude. Sometimes it's a good idea for people to have a little bit of adjustment, some help and stuff, right? But so when you're looking at developing particularly a positive attitude, and by positive I don't mean happy, upbeat, I mean a helpful attitude, taking things in the proper context and understanding and so on. Sometimes having a therapist help you with that is a good idea, but not necessarily. Sometimes you can do that on your own. But taking a look and saying, I'm taking responsibility for my life, and this is what I want. And when I look at this particular thing that happened, especially if it happened in early life, because it is amazing how much early life affects us. I can be talking to a 40-year-old man, but I can imagine I'm actually talking to an 8-year-old boy, because that's what's happening for him right then. Something that occurred at that time of life, mom misspoke to him, and that sat with him for the whole of his life, right?
Hmm.
So recognizing those things and trying to get them in perspective and saying, yeah, that took place, but it doesn't have to define you. And frankly, it might not even have been objectively what took place. In this case, I believe very much that the subjective reality matters, right? So your interpretation of something in the counseling context matters in many ways more than the objective reality, okay? But understanding the objective reality can help your subjective experience. So that if you find out, no, mom didn't mean to be mean to me. Oh, well, you know what? Now I can let go of that, right? And so there's different exercises and things that we can do that can try to do some emotional healing or emotional reorientation or whatever the wording we might want to use there. But a lot of what I see my job as is saying you are in charge of your life, and let's make it the way that you want it to be. Not everything is possible, but so many more things are possible than we often think. They just require a lot of work sometimes and time.
Awesome. Thanks, Wayne. And kind of a last question here. We've talked a lot about divorce. We also talked about how one of the things that we can do to battle the culture is do things like talk on this podcast. So maybe as a parting bit of advice, you also talked a little bit about how you're not sure that we're fully giving ourselves in our relationships. So I was just curious if you could give our audience some tips on how we can actually take steps towards actually fully giving of ourselves in our marriages.
So I think giving yourself fully in marriage is maybe the ultimate kind of human goal that we've got. But there is a kind of immediate goals as well. And those immediate goals are giving yourself in other ways too. So for you to look at how is it that I can make sure that I am being properly professional, right? Maintaining boundaries. I believe, by the way, that boundaries are really important. And sometimes Christians believe that boundaries are mean and therefore we don't set them up. In fact, boundaries are very, very loving because they help a person to be what he should be, right? If you feed into dysfunction, you allow the dysfunction typically to continue. But without, making myself a mat to be walked on, how can I give myself better at my professional duties? How can I give myself better to my friends? How can I give myself better in my parish? How can I give myself better to my brothers and sisters, even as an adult? How can I give myself to those I don't even know, in terms of volunteerism, if we're able to do that in busy lives, especially in a busy city, that's often hard for us to do. But to look at those kinds of things. Another kind of smaller scale, but I think really helpful thing to do is practice gratitude. And I don't want this to be hokey. Unfortunately, it happens to work best, I think, in a hokey kind of a way. And that is to like write it down
Mm.
every day, to like write down 3 or 4 or 5 things that they don't have to be about the day. They just have to be, wow, I noticed this, I remembered this. And it helps make your life, show your life in the context of how good it is. And it is easier for us to give when we see how we've been blessed, right? I will sometimes show clients, I have a piece of white paper and I'll draw a few dots on it. And I'll say, imagine that the dots are problems, right? When I hold it this far away from you, it's like, yeah, that's good. I got a few problems in my life. But when I put it right up to your face and you're staring at one dot, then your life looks really crappy,
Mhm.
right? So let's pull it back again and look at it in context. There are things that deserve some attention. Yes, that's an authentic problem, but you got so much goodness happening in your life, and try to remember that and then share that goodness. Naturally, I think we want to share goodness. So when somebody says there's a sale at such and such, you don't do that because you're making commission. You say that because I like you. I want to share something good. So naturally we share goodness when we discover it, right? And that also is a mirror of God, right? That's what we talk about with God and his creation. God didn't need us. He just was motivated. He was overwhelmed, if we can say that about God, by wanting to share his goodness, and there was no one to share goodness with. So he made someone.
Thank you, Wayne. That was terrific. I think we'll probably wrap it up there. But before we ask you to maybe lead us in a prayer to finish, if you are listening and you are a victim of divorce in whatever that looks like, if you're like my wife, she was born into a family. Her parents divorced when she was very young. That has left deep scars and wounds that her and I still talk through and deal with today. If you're like me, where you found yourself living through a situation like that, which, as we've discussed here a little bit, is all too common in our culture. So if you're one of those people, you're a victim of divorce in one way, shape, or form, feel free to reach out to us. We're either happy to connect you with maybe resources, also happy to just have a chat sometime, possibly if we can share our wisdom or direct you to someone that can. And so, yeah, if you are listening and that is your story, or someone in your life, if it's their story, feel free to reach out. You can find our information on the cough-calm-cat.com website. Wayne, can we ask you to lead us in a brief prayer here to wrap up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Father, we come before you today as the three of us are, as your sons, but as all people are, as your children. We thank you so much for the gifts that you've given us, the gifts, obviously, of our existence, of our being. But today, in light of our conversation, the gifts that sometimes are hidden, that we don't see. And primary among those gifts are our relationships, that you invite us in each of our relationships, even those that are not as romantic, as committed as marriage. You ask all of us in our different relationships to participate in the way that you exist within Trinity, in a relationship, in a communion of love. And we ask that you will bless us and help us as we move forward to be able to leave aside a little more every day the weaknesses and the sinfulness that hold us back from being able to accept the fullness of what you offer us. We ask for all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Wayne. This has been an awesome chat. We hope our audience gets something out of it. To all of you who are listening, this has been another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. We'll see you again next time.
God bless.